Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video we explain why wasn't Iran colonized by the Western powers. Some of these answers are partly correct, but they only take into account the past couple hundred years while forgetting European colonialism started in 1492. The Portuguese built some castles and forts in the islands of southern Iran early in the colonial period, and the Safavid Shah Abbas at the time. Upon learning of this, communication happened much slower back then. They had no internet. Basically subcontracted the British West India Company to gather its naval fleet and take out the Portuguese. Persia was not a naval power, so this was a logical decision as the British have a strong naval tradition and the Anglo-Persian fleet was successful in expunging the Portuguese. The fact is the central governments from Ismail Shah of the Safavid Empire up to the Khajas were sufficiently strong to withstand European colonialism. Sometimes by direct action such as Nader Shah's military successes against Russia, which lead to the Treaty of Rasht, or leveraging the resources of one Western power against another, such as the Anglo-Persian capture of Hormuz Island in 1622. Despite what some say, Nader Shah was a brilliant military strategist who modernized the Persian army, which in the 1700s both the infantry and cavalry were equipped with gunpowder weapons numbering 375,000 strong. At the time it was one of the most modern and powerful land force armies in the world, steamrolling over India and razing their capital Delhi to the ground, which is why it's called New Delhi today. Nader Shah instituted 3 years without any taxes after he brought back so much booty from India. But the Khaja dynasty allowed the state to fall into decline, as explained by others, and by the late 19th century you had spheres of influence by the British and Russians in northern and southern Iran. As the central government was sufficiently weak for the British to extract oil resource concessions in the south, and the Russians usurped Persian land in the Caucasus region. In fact, Persia, or Iran's borders with Russia, once extended as far as the Dagestan, Chechnya region of southern Russia today. The British and Russians used Iran and Afghanistan as a sort of buffer states between them in the so-called Great Game, but didn't really attempt to formally colonize either country. They were content to weaken the central government through loans, concessions and unfavorable treaties, as was also done against the Ottomans. And despite brief invasions by both countries during the World Wars, the Soviet occupation forces left under pressure from President Truman, and the British left promptly at the end of WW2. The invasion was to facilitate the Lend-Lease military aid program, whereby mostly American and some British military airplanes, tanks, vehicles, artillery, oil, small arms and ammunition were supplied in those critical months in the Battle of Moscow to the Soviets, as Soviet factories were still being relocated to Siberia and there was a severe shortage of arms to supply the war effort against the attacking Wehrmacht. There was also a lot of foodstuffs, wheat, grain, meat that was sent to the Soviet and used by the British in the war effort after it was forcibly requisitioned from the Iranian state, causing widespread food shortages and famine in the country. One of the main reasons used as an impetus for the invasion was the refusal of the government at the time to surrender the German citizens inside the country to British custody. Instead, they were allowed to evacuate to Vichy France-controlled Syria. This was used as a pretext for the invasion, since that incident was allegedly reason to believe the Iranian political leadership was in collusion or sympathetic with Nazi Germany. But the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s clearly illustrated the inability of Soviet Russia to penetrate the Middle East on a full scale and hold territory permanently, as they were soundly defeated in that war, and the British were content to use subterfuge, coups and political interference to maintain their control over Iran's oil supplies until they were nationalized in the 1950s.